Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Engineering for the Future is our next session title here, where our next set of industry experts are going to give us an overview of Project 13, the impact of value-based engineering, prioritizing sustainability, and creating a connected world. To tell us more, please give a very warm welcome to your panelists. First up, we have Dale Evans, Chair of Project 13 and Director of DE Advisory. Next up, we have Dr. Paul McKeown, who is the Executive Director of HanmiGlobal and Saudi Arabia branch and Committee Chairman of the Institution of Civil Engineers. And finally, we have Gavin van Tonder. He is the Executive Director of Water at NEOM. And now to tell us more and to continue with the introductions, please do give a very warm welcome to your moderator, Mark Jamieson, Middle East and Africa Council Member of ICE and Vice President for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia at PK Consult.
Thank you, Laura, and welcome everybody to this session on engineering the future. With me today, I have Dale Evans, who is the chair of Project 13. I also have Dr. Paul McKeown, and from NEOM, I have Gavin, who is between us, we're going to tackle a number of the real key questions that I believe will help determine the future of the engineering, and particularly how we as civil engineers are going to interface with society. So to kick us off, I'd like to introduce Dale. And Dale, perhaps you could start by giving us some introduction and sort of some key thoughts around Project 13, which I know is an Institution of Civil Engineers and Infrastructure Client Group initiative. But if you could perhaps tell the audience, what is it and what does it bring? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. No, thanks, Mark. So Project 13 it's an international initiative, and it's focused on more effective delivery models for infrastructure. As you said, it was instigated by the Institution of Civil Engineers, the Infrastructure Client Group, and it really came out of a clear recognition that traditional delivery processes are no longer fit for purpose. And the business case, which is worth just touching on, focuses on three core bits. Firstly, construction productivity, which just runs out of kilter with all other sectors and does so internationally. Contracting models that aren't sustainable and create a number of sort of exacerbating problems. And then the big opportunity, which is how do we enable digital transformation? So those are the three elements of the business case. And what Project 13 did at the outset, so I think this is about 2015, was to go and research exemplar projects. So the research team spent time with programs and projects that had delivered exceptional value and done so over an extended period of time. And they identified the underpinning characteristics, the thing that had made those projects exemplars. And these became the principles that defined the Project 13 approach. So the really important point in all of that is that Project 13 isn't a theory. It's not some academic hypothesis. It's actually demonstrated industry best practice. It's not common practice, but it is demonstrated industry best practice. And just briefly, what the research identified was that these exemplars shift away from a traditional transactional approach to how we contract and how we procure, and that the exemplars have created enterprises to deliver their programs and their projects. So enterprises bring together the right partners in highly integrated collaborative teams. They put an absolute focus on delivering the outcomes that are required from the investment. So they don't start with a focus on scope or outputs. This is about delivering better outcomes. They work hard to establish aligned relationships, and they engage effectively with the wider ecosystem. That they use reward models that incentivize partners to add value. And with that, they take a balanced approach to how risk is allocated and how risk is managed and hopefully how risk is incentivized. And they develop delivery processes that look more like production and less like traditional civil engineering or construction. So those are some of the sort of headline characteristics. It was launched in 2018. It's already got widespread adoption. It's now a partner initiative of the World Economic Forum, who are really actively driving a shift to new delivery models globally. And it's become a global community of adopting organisations who, as they drive the shift to Project 13 principles, share their learning and share their progress across the community. So essentially, from that starting point, it's become an industry movement, just based on sharing best practice around new delivery models. So that's a quick run through, I guess, what is probably the last 5 years of progress.
Thank you, Dale. No, and fascinating. And I think particularly for practitioners here in the Middle East, it offers some real interesting alternative to the more traditional methods of procurement that we currently engage with. I'm going to quickly move this on, and Paul, perhaps you could give us some of your thoughts around the impact of value-based engineering as opposed to perhaps the more traditional lowest common denominator that we are more familiar with.
Thank you, Mark. Currently in the Middle East, there's a lot more focus now on a sort of whole life costing, whole life value, and of course value-based engineering. And I've noticed certainly within my time here over several years that looking at the sort of elements of value engineering at the end of, say, for example, the design life, at the end of the design phase, is not really as efficient as you would want it. You would want to really have the engineering, designers looking at the sort of value-based approach throughout the design, and therefore not only saving time, but also, as I said, more of an integrated approach into the design element and bringing that value in. And of course, you're looking at sort of, improving the essential functions within that, of course, which, is your cycle cost consistent with cycle cost consistence with performance, quality, reliability, and safety. And of course, looking at the tail end of that in terms of making sure you're delivering that high value proponent or aspect of an asset in terms of its functionality, but looking at, of course, the long-term cost value. So there's definitely a big move towards that. And in doing that, what I've noticed as well is across different faculties or across different functions within an organization, such as the technical aspect, it's not just the technical aspect, which most people would think it would be in design, but it's also the strategic look at it and how that is valued, and also how the management actually get involved and how they can support that value engineering approach. So certainly, in terms of impact and in terms of how that value is based within designs, I've seen an approach that's changed, and more so really to bring value to the customer, of course, as well as just the clients in terms of delivering that short-term opaque sort of result. They want to look at the longer-term value as well. So that's really what I can see currently within the market here within the Middle East.
Thank you. And Gavin, on the sort of sustainability side, and indeed even the connected world, you're obviously part of the new venture of NEOM, which really is seeking to stretch the boundaries of what we build and how we build. Perhaps a few comments from you to kick us off around that would be very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question, Mark, and thank you for the introduction, Laura. From a water perspective in NEOM, when we talk about sustainability in buildings, we're not just talking about development that doesn't have an impact on the environment. Our children will tell us we've already destroyed the environment at our age. So how are we going to fix it? That the world doesn't actually need just sustainability. Damage has been done, and we need to now turn that around. And that's what we're looking at in NEOM. So we're looking at regeneration and enhancement of the environment. This is our focus in NEOM. Just as an example from a water-only perspective, not a building really, but we stop groundwater extraction so that we can get the groundwater levels to rise and start greenifying the desert. And then we move to 100% desalination. And then from a sustainability perspective, because we're building something out from scratch, when we look at the civils, we're looking at why would we bury water pipes? Why don't we put them inside culverts, and then when it needs to be enlarged or replaced, or another pipe needs to be loaded into the culvert, you don't have all the social issues and the environmental issues of digging up ground again. You can just go and lay more pipe. And so you don't want to get into the position where you are in London, Paris, where you just have no infrastructure space available to grow the water infrastructure anymore because it's consumed either by a underground train or a sewerage pipe. So you want to plan well in advance for the next 80 years, 100 years, and put systems in place that allow sustainability. And then from a circular economy perspective, it's what equipment we use. Do we use green cement? Can we use the brine that comes from a desalination plant in order to use green cement? How do we reuse the water inside construction? How do we reuse the water inside the house? The equipment that we use in NEOM, we're going to do brine processing of the desalination plant. There's a lot of gypsum that comes out of brine, in fact. So taking the gypsum from the seawater and making the gypsum boards and utilizing that inside the houses, that's the kind of circular economy and sustainability we're looking at in NEOM, just as a brief example.
No, brilliant. Thank you. And perhaps, Dale, just coming back to the connected world piece and how we are, as engineers and as clients, facing the new challenges of digital transformation. What do you see as Project 13's role? How can that help both those joining the industry, but also, more importantly, those leading the industry in terms of looking at, what does the future hold?
Yes, I think there are a couple of aspects within Project 13. If I could pick a couple of bits around the approach itself, what Project 13 advocates, and then maybe about how Project 13 is organised as a movement. So, firstly, within the delivery model, I think this whole bit about outcomes. For me, digital is enabled by a focus on outcomes, and it seems a really obvious thing, doesn't it? But when we invest to deliver better outcomes. And those outcomes, whether they're customer, whether they're community, whether their environment, they should be the focus of the delivery process, and we should engage with our partners and our ecosystems in how we best deliver those outcomes. So that's one first enabler. Digital is definitely enabled by an outcome perspective. And then the second is that digital demands a highly integrated, connected approach. Our traditional approach, where we create interfaces and boundaries and handoffs, it's sort of quite counter to the whole integration that digital needs and digital demands. So a model that recognises when we deliver through integrated teams, that it's about how we create those high-performing integrated teams made up of partners and suppliers, and how we bring those together. That is a huge enabler to digital. Interestingly, within the infrastructure client group, we started with digital as part of Project 13, recognised in that very close relationship. They're now two related initiatives, so Project 13 delivery models and digital transformation. Just in terms of Project 13 as a movement, I think the way it can help is that community of organisations coming together to share their experience is in itself an accelerator. And the whole, for me, one of the whole challenges around just digital, which is a huge opportunity, is that it is a change process, and it's an emerging organic change process. This is not about just one big investment in IT. This is about how we manage an ongoing emergent change process, and you can see that in the organisations that have done it successfully. They have this very incremental, constant approach to how they try to integrate digital into what they do, and bringing those organisations together so they share their learning, so they share what's worked, what hasn't worked, and they do it collectively, ends up being a sort of an accelerator. So, as we all tackle the digital opportunity, sharing our learning and just exchanging our experience as we do so is, I believe, a great industry accelerator. But digital it's not a technology challenge; it's a change challenge.
Thank you. Yeah, and couldn't agree more. I think what certainly my experience of Project 13 so far is what is exemplary is the vision of the client-led groups in terms of understanding their role and their commitment isn't just a capex phased element, but it's actually it's managing and developing and ultimately decommissioning those assets. And I think that is comes on to Paul's point earlier about the issues of value based solutions and how we make that work. And I'd certainly be interested to hear, perhaps coming back to Paul, in terms of the something like the Project 13 and its potential to help transform Middle East procurement and projects. Can you perhaps sort of see and give some comments about how you see Project 13 could be adopted and sort of what we would need to do and where the benefits lie for both the projects themselves, but perhaps more importantly, the entities that are engaged with it?
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. Yeah, I mean, I'll go back to the 5 key components really of Project 13 and go through those. So first of all, you have your organizational improvements, the digital transformation, and your governance, and your integration, and your capability. And for any client or any consultant coming into a client, improving those 5 key aspects will enhance any project or program. And currently within Saudi Arabia, for example, I've worked in a number of ministries here, there's a big push in terms of not just digital transformation, but also organizational structures to make them more lean and more agile. And also in terms of governance, how that can be not just set up a normal governance structure, like, for example, they're going to have a department with 10 people in it in one location, and they just replicate that across the kingdom. They're now looked at really the services within those requirements and what those services can deliver, and they're bespoke then to each individual need. So if you look at that in terms of how a consultant would come in for integration, for example, you can clearly see that having an integrated approach in terms of working with the client rather than for the client as such and within the client really adds value to everybody. And that, I believe, is a model that now has certainly been used and is being used within the Middle East, and certainly is not only adding to the capability of the owner in terms of knowledge transfer, but also, of course, in improving engineering itself in general across the Middle East. So in terms of, to go back to your question, yes, I do. I see this model. It's very clear. It's very easy to understand. And certainly as a driver in terms of, getting involved with clients and showing where your focus should be, it certainly sets a great model.
Great. And Gavin, in terms of sort of NEOM, and as I touched on in my introduction, you certainly have, set out to really deliver a city that is for the future. And there's a lot of, obviously, media and industry interest in it. So would you see something like Project 13 sitting in that sort of organizational structure, or is it still something that, whilst we are looking for sustainable and deliverable solutions, this is still kind of a little bit too new?
No, it's not new. I would say it's certainly something that we looked at and had to design the processes around right from the beginning. We put a RACI matrix in place in order to be able to understand who's responsible, who's accountable, who needs to be consulted, because we're not just one sector here, we're 16 sectors. So I'm just in the water sector. But if I'm going to construct water, I have to know the demand profiles of everybody else in the sports environment, health and well-being, manufacturing, industrial, energy. I have to know all of those different sectors. So it's all about collaboration. So having a central enterprise where you can collaborate across with each person and with each department in order to be able to understand what the requirements are. And when you're building something from scratch, you need to know if you're going to run a water pipeline, at the same time you want to run the tech and digital fiber optic cable. At the same time, you want to run the electricity cables. At the same time, you want to run the wastewater pipelines and district cooling if it exists. So all of that is a collaboration and needs governance and control. So Project 13 fits right into us right from the beginning, from when we first started the project, making sure all of the sectors, I mean, the biggest word is collaboration, actually, across all of those. But then making sure that we have the governance in place, that we are adhering to the principles. So we are adhering to sustainability, we are adhering to circular economy, we are making the right decisions in that regard. And then when it comes to digital transformation, of course, for us, the biggest benefit is digital twins. And we have real projects where we are actually bringing together a range of companies and doing pilot phases where we actually put those companies all together and say, okay, how are we going to develop out the digital twin for this water infrastructure network, which will be the first one that's actually been done in the world. So we've done the pilot phase and now we start to implement. But it's essential for us to be able to visualize what we are going to construct before we actually construct it, because if you can walk amongst the desalination plant and looking at it at all its aspects, you will see the problems that occur. If you can visualize the water distribution network by walking next to it, you will actually see the problems that occur. And you don't get that digital without the input of the pump manufacturer, without the input of the pipe manufacturer, the wall manufacturer, the cement manufacturer. All of those bring you the specifications that need to get input into that digital twin. So key for us is to make sure that we do it right from the beginning and do it in the digital manner with all the information we have at hand.
Brilliant, thank you. And Dale, the relationship between Project 13 and sustainability is, I know, a strong one, because ultimately we're looking at things from a whole life costing perspective. But perhaps you could sort of elaborate a little bit more about how that is helping clients with their sustainability goal setting and indeed with their deliverables.
Yeah, and I will echo probably some of the points that Gavin's just made, actually, I think, which was spot on. And I'll probably echo the whole bit about outcomes again, because that is, for me, the starting point. So if you take what some clients have learned, but both positively and negatively, if we make sustainability a nice secondary objective. So we've got a core set of goals, but on top of that, we'd like to do something around sustainability or carbon or the environment. Then that's what it'll be. It'll be secondary, and it won't be truly integrated into what we do and what we deliver. Whereas those organisations and those Project 13 adopters that are saying, actually, I've got some really clear goals in terms of environment, in terms of sustainability, in terms of carbon. They're part of the outcomes that I want to deliver. They become part of governance and part of how you construct and manage your relationships, then you will make progress and you'll be effective. So, the real starting point is that as clients, we should clearly articulate what it is we want to achieve as a set of outcomes, and we should be prepared to engage with partners and suppliers in achieving all of that. And if we do that, then it is just a core part of what we do. It's a core part of governance. It's a core part of how we see and how we manage performance. And there are some great examples that demonstrate that. I mean, there are some infrastructure organisations that have made great progress in terms of carbon, in terms of net zero, in terms of their sustainability to, or their contribution to sustainability. And when you look at those good examples, the really striking thing is that it's partners that are making that contribution. If we give partners the opportunity to contribute, they undoubtedly bring a capability that can help us achieve some quite striking sustainability goals. So, I'm echoing the points about outcomes, about being prepared to engage with partners and really, leverage their capability to achieve those goals.
Brilliant. Thank you. And Paul, I'm coming back to the digital twin. I'm conscious you're working on a number of key programs in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia at the minute. What's your take on the adoption of the sort of digital twinning and the digital sort of transformation that we're hearing so much about? But are you see? And obviously, Gavin has highlighted it's very much in use in NEOM. But are you seeing it elsewhere as well?
Yeah, I mean, there's a big push at the minute to integrate all your IT platforms, your BIMs, and your drone technologies, and your geographic survey, all the stuff that you have in a project. And it used to be PMIS, for example, Project Management Information System, and they're sort of trying to push that at the minute to the next level. And currently, there's focus certainly in sort of this metaverse approach to things, where you create your own environment, and it has a lot more flexibility flexibility and and capacity for bringing in a lot of the technologies as they're being developed. Because one of the biggest problems we've seen is the integration of the systems themselves. There's a lot of different softwares, languages, so on and so forth, connectivity issues. But certainly there's now more use of the VR type world in terms of not just in Saudi Arabia, but also globally now in terms of how that can be done. And that's something I've seen more of a push for within what we're doing in terms of IT integration, and platform development, digital transformation, so on and so forth. But I mean, for me, if you go back to that original question in terms of, your sort of life cost investment and sustainability itself. Sustainability has, of course, the economic aspect, it has the social aspect, and it has the environmental aspect. And I find quite often that the social aspect seems to be ignored nearly or reduced significantly, and it's outweighed by the other two. But certainly the social aspect has to be taken into consideration a lot in the early stages of any design, certainly through the life cycle when you're looking at the whole life cost, and you're specifically, if you're a client, you're looking at the return on investment and so on and so forth. But quite often with these big projects, NEOM included, the client is actually the normal person on the street. It's a normal person within, a normal citizen. And that person has to have value at the table when you go through the life cycle, rather than just the bottom end capex and how you're going to do that. And it relates, I suppose, in a way to what Gavin was saying about, we looked at putting in culverts, in terms of NEOM, because we want to make sure it's future-proofed. And there's a whole life cost analysis with that. And there's a return on investment within 20 years or 15 years. And you have to consider those aspects fully. So when you look at an integrated platform, you can certainly start looking at those in terms of those three aspects. You can look at the social, environmental, and economic aspects of sustainability, and you can put values and you can put, analysis against those. And really bringing those integrated technologies together really enforces the true value in what we're trying to achieve. And that will, of course, link back into your value engineering. So all these subjects are quite easily linked, but ultimately that overall focus on that whole life cost approach certainly has to be considered fully, and the integrated transformation is a really good way of doing that, and looking at those new approaches in terms of the metaverse or the hybrid sort of PMIS systems. That's certainly adding value, and I can see that being more and more in focus within the Middle East today.
Thanks, Paul. That's particularly enlightening, and I think Gavin, as an end user and as a sort of asset owner that you'll become, how are you and how are the different teams at NEOM looking at that whole life costing aspect, and how are they also, and taking Paul's point, how are they actually integrating the kind of needs of society represented by its citizens into the delivery of this incredibly new, amazing city?
It's a very good question. I will start by saying that the biggest problem we have is people, and their history about how they've worked in the past. Change doesn't happen with the technology. Change doesn't happen with digital transformation. Change happens with people. And unless you can convince them that this is the right way to go, you have to convince them it's the right way to go, but it's an uphill struggle all the time. It's you're fighting on two fronts as far as the implementation goes. You're fighting on the upfront capex cost, because if you're going to look at whole of life costs, you come away from the lowest cost scenario, right? So you have to go through procurement issues where you're no longer taking the lowest cost, you're taking the one that gives you the best value over time, and then you've got to change the mindset of the people that have been doing that construction in a certain way for the last 50 years. And say to them, actually, no, we're not going to build it like that anymore. We're going to build it like this because that gives us a much better life cycle cost. So, but the answer to your question comes back to collaboration. When we look at the implementation of a region, and you start looking at district cooling, renewable energy, water consumption, irrigation, and the materials that is actually used for the houses in order to lower the cost, because you can build a very, very expensive city and nobody will, or very, very expensive region and nobody will come there, right? Because it's just too expensive. So what you also got to take into account, you have to have the lowest cost as well. So the main benefit of an eco-friendly city, say, is that it's also one of the lowest cost cities or regions to live in. So incorporating all of that in an early stage about, if I'm going to use district cooling, should I use seawater? Should I use fresh water? Should I just use renewable energy, and so that I can switch it off at night? All of those things, and frankly, it always comes back to the same word. It's about people and collaboration, and all of those people working together is what is required in order to make what NEOM should be in the future.
Brilliant, thank you. And Dale, the people aspect of Project 13, we can clearly see the project benefits. We can see the benefits to clients from a better performing, longer lasting asset, and obviously from the innovations that come through the collaborations. Where do you see the sort of, if you like, the ultimate end user benefits? Where do you see the societal and community benefits from Project 13?
So that's a big part of it, isn't it? I think and again, it comes back to how we align the whole delivery process with what we're trying to achieve, and what the aims of those investments are. So it's an easy thing to talk about, really clearly articulating the better outcomes that investment should deliver, but actually, understanding it, articulating it, understanding value at outcome level is not the easiest thing to do. So those organisations that have done it successfully, and again, Gavin's touched on this, are those clients that have spent time making sure they understand the customer context, understand customer requirements, understand what information looks like in a customer environment, and then work backwards from there. So there's a really big bit about understanding, if we're going to invest, what are those better outcomes, and using that as the focus point for delivery. It's so different, because the reality is that while those things might often be clear in a business case, by the time we get to actually engage, by the time we get into procurement and we're bringing partners on board, we've started to turn things into scope and into outputs and stuff that we can run a procurement process of. So the reasons we lose sight of those things are that we traditionally drive procurement off, as Gavin said, a process that sees capital cost as a determining factor. So we need to characterise everything as a solution, as a scope, and we lose sight of what we're actually trying to achieve. So the simple point about being really clear about societal outcomes, about the outcomes we want to achieve, and engaging around that is a very different approach. Just the one thing on people, I think there's a huge opportunity. When we invest in infrastructure, when we develop infrastructure, we are making a huge contribution to society, and we're all part of professions that therefore have an impact on society. And because we tend to just engage around the engineering aspects of that, I think we lose an opportunity to engage with people effectively. And where you've seen some of these organisations, really focus on outcomes, engage with their partners, engage with teams on how we can better deliver those outcomes, then that's a much more fulfilling place to work. If you're part of an engineering team, being asked to deliver some scope that's predefined is much less fulfilling than being asked to contribute to a set of better outcomes for society. So, for me, and I'm not, this isn't a theory. You can see it in some of those case studies I've talked about, where we've engaged with organisations to deliver better outcomes. It's a place where we're clear about the contribution that we as individuals make, and is therefore a much more fulfilling environment. So, if you stand back and look at us as a profession and the contribution we make, I think we've historically missed an opportunity to engage and attract people into our industry. And it's one we need to take if we're going to be competitive and if we're going to attract the right people.
Yeah, it's brilliant. And I think that's a really interesting point, because actually in all of this, and we've mentioned people throughout at various stages, but if we take the recent IC Brunel lecture as an example, in terms of building resilience and building capability for the future of cities and societies across the world, having that attraction to bring people into the industry to engage and allow them to innovate is, I think, a fundamental requirement of what we will need going forward, and engineering in the future is going to rely on that. And I think the sort of, one of the things I've seen is that the definition of who's a contributor to the built environment is going to be very, very different in the next 10, 15, 20 years than what it was 20 or 30 years ago. And again, certainly I'd like to think that the Project 13 piece with its showcasing of real life case studies is a great way to help demonstrate that. So thank you, Dale. Paul, just coming back to you on the people piece. I think in across the Middle East, we know we've got quite a young demographic. What are we going to do in terms of creating the engineers of the future? What are we going to do to help deliver all these sort of sustainable solutions? And what's the how are we going to attract them from perhaps the social media side of life into the realities of what's needed to build real life?
That's a great question. Well, I can only tell you what's going on at the minute. I mean, there's a significant drive now across Saudi Arabia at the moment to encourage young people into engineering, and more recently, women into engineering, girls into engineering, or women into engineering. And certainly over the last couple of years, we've actually seen our first graduate in engineering out of one of the universities here, and they're encouraged, as they should be, to be involved in engineering as a whole. So if you look at research, for example, I think there was research done back a couple of years ago here, and excuse me if I'm not getting the proper percentages, but there was research done in the primary schools in girls. How many girls within that school would like to be engineers? And surprisingly, there was a lot. It was over 50% of them said they would like to be involved in engineering, and that has seen its first fruits. So it's through that encouragement in engineering, through the fact that Saudi Arabia as a whole is bringing involved in all these mega projects, and they're bringing in these world experts into these, like the NEOM and the Qiddiya and the Mal, all these big projects, which are really global great projects to work on. That in itself has its own momentum in terms of encouraging young Saudis into engineering within Saudi Arabia and, of course, across the Middle East. So I don't see there being a negative at all in terms of trying to encourage people into engineering within Saudi Arabia. In fact, quite the opposite, purely because we have some of the most interesting projects going on globally at the moment.
Thank you. And I just taking that forward, Gavin. I think Paul, for me, Paul's absolutely spot on. There is definitely a draw to engineering for whatever reason, which is fabulous as far as the professional industry is concerned. But what about the broader communication? Perhaps you could shed light on, say, what NEOM is doing to promote the objectives that it's setting in terms of creating a sustainable future, and also how it engages with its public, both most importantly the local public who are directly affected by it, but also by the broader piece of the international market.
So we have a dedicated marketing team that works across all the sectors and does an actually excellent job at advertising NEOM to the world, not just in Saudi Arabia, but to the world. And we actually have a dedicated marketing person that works with us in order to do that. And it works out very well. As an example, we were in WetEx a couple of weeks ago, and we managed to meet all of the key partners that we had planned to meet as far as building the first desalination plant. And the interest level is extremely high. And on the people front, we have inside NEOM, we have a what we call a grow a candidacy for fresh outs in all disciplines, but of course ours all come from the engineering disciplines. And the applications, not just inside Saudi, but the applications for that were around 2,000 fresh out graduate engineers, both male and female. And we cannot obviously take 2,000 of them on board, but we took as many as we can, and each of them are put inside each of the different disciplines and get to move around with very, very focused training schedules. Also, with two of our Saudi engineers, we sent. They're both from the civil background, but so we sent to Cranfield in the UK to get masters in water and wastewater, because we want them to focus on water and wastewater, and there isn't really a school inside the kingdom to focus on water and wastewater. So off they went to Cranfield to do that. And we have events ongoing all the time, and we're very active on LinkedIn and on YouTube and all these other things like Facebook that I'm not part of, but so we're very active on all of those things. And really trying to get the name out there, but really trying, one of our mottos is attracting the greatest minds in the world. And, I think in my team in water, I've managed to do that. And we have a really, really good team. But at the same time, we have to have at least 40% of our team have to be under the age of 35. So we have all these KPIs around making sure that we hire the right people, because if we're going to be the future region, you want the people that are under the age of 35, because those are the people that think differently about environment, think differently about sustainability, and are here for the long run. Whereas as old guys like me will probably retire in 5 years' time, and so I think NEOM does a fantastic job at attracting and at the same time developing, especially young engineers.
Brilliant, thank you. So we're coming to the end of this session, and hopefully it's been of interest and use to everybody. So I'm just going to spend the last few moments that we have. Dale, any final words from yourself? And I thank you very much for introducing to, I'm sure, a large part of the audience, Project 13, who I now hope will all be busy finding it on the webpage. But any final thoughts, Dale?
Just one headline, really. I think I think it's a really exciting time for our industry, because I think if we just talked about delivery models and how we worked 10 years ago, there have been a variety of different opinions and people have different views. I think if we'd asked 5 years ago, people said, actually, no, we're headed for a place where more integrated collaborative models are the future, but the case isn't proven. I think we've reached a point where the case is proven. If you look at globally, there's no doubt best practice is coming from more integrated collaborative delivery models. So, that echoes some of the points that the other speakers have mentioned. If we want to deliver more effectively, then we do need to move towards models which engage with organisations, where we create more integrated collaborative teams, and we create the opportunity for innovation. So the case is proven. That bumps into lots of change, and it's hard to do, but that's where best practice sits. So an exciting time for our industry as we start to work differently.
Thank you, Dale. And Gavin, some final thoughts on engineering of the future?
I come from the other side of the table. I was trying to actually implement technologies into companies and struggled. So for me, it's all about creating that ecosystem of partners that includes the customer, pulling all of those people together and with the same objective at the end of the day. So that ecosystem of partners for me is key.
Thank you very much. That's brilliant. And finally, but not least, Dr. Paul, your final thoughts, please.
Thank you, Mark. For me, I suppose it's a follow-on from what's been said there, and also a focus on the to get back into the core of the sustainability and the whole life cost and stuff like that, we really need to show value to the ultimate customer, which is the person on the ground. And I think every engineer, whether young or old, I think ultimately can relate to that. And if they keep that in focus, I think all those little key components of sustainability, value engineering, resilient communities, which we sort of skipped around there earlier on and stuff like that, it all builds into that big picture. So for me, I suppose having that integration as one of the core elements of the 13 approach is certainly key.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. So thank you all, gentlemen. Thank you, Dale. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Gavin, for your time. Laura, over to you.
Well, a huge thank you there to our panel. A fascinating discussion, that one, on engineering for the future. And I'm so pleased that all of you have managed to stay with us to answer our audience questions. Now, just before we go into this, I hear that a congratulations is in order to NEOM on the announcement of Oxagon, which is a carbon emissions-free industrial city, which will float on the Red Sea, if I'm not wrong. So a huge congratulations there. And off the back of that, I thought I'd start with Gavin, because we have a question for you that's come in from our audience. So here it is, our first question of this session, which is, can you tell us about the circular economy versus sustainable development from your experience of working on NEOM? That's for Gavin.
Thank you. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, yes. I think you're off mute now. Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
Okay, so for me, circular economy and sustainable development are essentially very different things. When we talk about sustainability, we talk about tending to develop without impacting the environment. And for me, this is contrary to what the world actually needs. I think we have seen what happened on COP26, and the damage has been done. My daughter tells me the damage has been done in the environment. So now your job is to try and fix it and get it back to what it used to be. So sustainability for me is an old word, and if you look at COP26, you start seeing that it's not anymore about sustainability, but it's more about improving the environment and fixing the damage that we have done. So in NEOM, we are regenerating and enhancing the environment. As an example, we stop all the groundwater extraction and allow the ground level to rise, and that starts to bring the green and the greenery that has small roots back up to the surface. And that for me is starting to fix the environment. Let's not take the water out of that, the fossil aquifers. Let's take water out of the sea and desalinate it with renewable energy. And that's for me enhancing. It goes a step further than sustainability. When we talk about circular economy, it's more around how we consume in order to ensure that we can enhance the environment, and how we reuse. For example, perfect circular economy is obviously wastewater and treating wastewater and getting it back and utilizing our landscaping, thereby reducing the amount of desalination you have to do, reducing pumping costs, etc. So we don't look at water conservation, we look at that circular economy. I don't want to stop people from utilizing water. I want them to utilize water because we get 90% of the water people utilize to get back, unless it's going under irrigation. So we don't really look at conservation, we look at the circular economy and using water efficiency. So, by desalinating water with renewable energy, we're doing more than circular economy, as we are adding to a scarce resource without harming the environment. This is, as I said before, it's about developing with enhancing the environment. So for me, there are two really different things.
And what's fascinating with these circular economies as well is there is so much to learn from nature as well that is very sort of underestimated. We move on now to our next question. Do you think it would be helpful to have a mandatory workshop on value engineering for government-funded projects? Who would like to take that one? I'm presuming Mark and Dr. Paul, that might be directed to you. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, well, I'll start with that and then hand the baton to Paul. I think the concept of value engineering is often misunderstood, and I think it's something we've discussed previously on many occasions. But certainly, understanding true value, particularly from an infrastructure perspective, involves looking not just at CapEx and how you can reduce that, but more importantly about the operational costs and the operational impact that your project has. So for me, the challenge is perhaps less about how we invest in the CapEx programs and more about how we ensure that the overall whole life cost of a project is considered. And there's certainly value in educating not just governments, but everybody engaged in the construction industry around that. Paul.
Mark, I would agree. Thanks for passing the button there. But I would agree that we need to look at whole value engineering throughout the actual process of even stage 1 to 2, I would call it. Where you're doing your planning, you're doing your design, you're doing your preliminary design, you're doing your detailed design, rather than having it as an exercise that happens at the end of one of those stages. What we're tending to see is actually a more holistic view and actually people being involved right the way through. So value engineering being added at every single element of that design rather than being an end of stage process. And that in itself gives additional value due to not only in terms of time, but also in terms of the flexibility and the client perception of what's going on over a longer period, which of course gives everybody opportunities then to add more value as they go through it. So from a value engineering perspective, I would always encourage that is brought in and taken throughout the design stage rather than being an exercise at the end.
Thanks so much. We've got a question through for Dale on Project 13. We've got a couple of questions on this, in fact. So does Project 13 address the legal necessity to appoint legal entities as principal designer and as principal contractor? Do you have any experience of PC and PD under Project 13, like CDM 2015? And also, how can we develop leadership to match the aspirations of Project 13? Dale.
So on the first point, so really good question, and an opportunity to sort of debunk a myth, really, which is that more integrated, collaborative ways of working fall foul of CDM and the principles around CDM. I mean, they don't, and some of the early adopters have tested that, and they've looked at within a highly integrated model. How are we clear about CDM provisions? How are we clear about principal designer and principal contractor? And they also called in some of the health safety bodies and asked them to work through the model. And pretty much what those bodies said is this conforms with our requirements just as any traditional model was. And provided at any point we understand and are clear about the control in mind, then actually we're completely supportive of integrated models. So that was the feedback from the bodies that drive and own health and safety legislation. So, the same common sense principles apply. Let's just be really clear about control in mind, how we make decisions, how we enact health and safety provisions, and an integrated model can do that just as effectively. So actually the question is a really good opportunity to debunk a myth that collaboration falls foul of health and safety. On the second part, how do we get leadership to match the commitment? Well, that's where we need government, client organisations and bodies all throwing their commitment behind new ways of working. And as I've mentioned, the really exciting part about things like Project 13 is that we're doing that collectively. So we've got groups working together, learning from each other and collectively driving the industry agenda forward. And that starts to feel like real leadership because we're doing it together and with a common agenda.
Paul, over to you. What is the number one thing the engineering sector can do to reduce carbon emissions?
Not an easy question. And thank you for it. I think, we need to start, if I looked at some of the stuff that's happening at the minute in relation to these regional not regional, countrywide schemes where you would have, for example, energy sharing. Where North Africa would share energy with, potential parts of the Middle East or maybe in Europe or whatever way they want to move that around. I think Switzerland, have a contract with Assure Energy. Doing that country to country, really, with those countries that do create, they do have environments where they can generate more energy than others. I think that's potentially a better way forward, rather than you can improve, of course, internally, which is what everybody's trying to do, hitting their sustainability targets, looking at energy conservation and bringing all these technologies together. But I think if you look at it more from a planet perspective, and the fact that we all live on one planet, as we all do, and the fact that that there are these countries that generate excess energy resources that can be shared potentially, and there's profit in it, of course, for that country, and there's savings for the other country. I think that is a model that we need to maybe investigate further if we're going to really have an impact on carbon and the reduction in carbon globally. And then backing that up, of course, with the science and research we're putting into solar and wind and all these different types of energy generation technologies.
Mark, it's back to you. What is the best example of value engineering that you've seen, and why?
Well, it actually, personal experience was a complex nuclear facility where, again, a sort of pre-runner to Project 13 existed in a collaborative environment with client, designers, operators, and contractors involved. And the value engineering piece was actually more of almost a construction program change, wherein there was a sudden recognition that certain vessels, large vessels that needed to be housed, were originally planned to all be done long after the construction work had been finished. But by working together as a team and re-looking at the program and re-looking at the sequencing, we were able to save about 3 months off the overall program by building the building around the vessels rather than waiting to it was predominantly finished and then fitting them in what would have been a very complex and expensive engineering operation, which would then have had to been followed up with filling in the holes, be it walls or ceilings, for getting the vessels contained. And what that sort of came back to me with as a part of a lessons learned was, we not only had saved a significant amount of time, we'd saved a significant amount of money because the structure was made with T50 and T40 steel, so it was significant elements. And couplers to do all the jointing were very expensive. It was much better quality because we didn't have letterboxing and the sort of the invariable challenges of filling in holes afterwards. And also the way that the team was then brought together, which was probably the most important thing, is that the teams that sort of very much initially were standoffish now looked at everything in a different way. And in that essence, that added probably more value to that project than anything else.
Thank you so much. Gavin, another one for you that's come in. How can eco-friendly infrastructures contribute to economic growth? And what are the main challenges within NEOM compared to projects of a similar nature?
For us, eco-friendly infrastructure is all about using the right materials for the environment and placing importance on interconnectivity and collaboration as well must start from the beginning stages. But in a desert environment, we need to use construction material that repels the heat, allows the interior to remain cool. The whole idea is that we don't have a huge amount of district cooling that we have to utilize. So, what infrastructure you use and what cement you use is quite important. The more cooling water you require, the more you have to desalinate, the more you have to pump, the more electricity is consumed. So, getting the materials right from an eco-friendly perspective is essential. But it's not only from that perspective, it also reduces your operational costs. So, it comes back to the whole of life analysis again that we were speaking about earlier. The larger desalination plant, the larger PV plant, the larger your wind farm, more energy use, etc. So when we design infrastructure, we must have a strong focus on energy utilization in our environment. When we talk about hot water, cold water, district cooling, drinking water, mineral water, all of those need to be integrated, including the wastewater, into a circular economy system. And for me, that comes back to being eco-friendly as well. Economic growth really comes from your cost structures being low and from your operating costs being low. So essential for us to look at it from a whole of life perspective when we choose the materials and the type of infrastructure that we're going to be doing. Remind me, what was the second part of the question, please, Laura?
Yes, what are the main challenges within NEOM compared to projects of a similar nature?
Actually, I think it's the other way around. NEOM has the biggest benefit that we don't have an inherent infrastructure. Because we don't have an inherent infrastructure, we don't have to, we've got a blank sheet. We can design how we want to design, we can implement how we want to implement. When I work on existing water infrastructures, we're still using the standards for the design and development that were put in place 50 years ago, because that's how we've always done it, and that's how we're going to expand it. When you're going to do it right from scratch, you can put in the brand new infrastructure, brand new regulations, brand new rules, brand new procedures. But when you're in a public entity and you've been doing it one way for 100 years, it's very difficult to change the mentality of the people to do it in different ways. And when you have your processes that have been designed 50 years, I've just been through the job of going through and designing processes and procedures for the water utility. That's like a terabyte of data that we have to file through and go through. So you can imagine that's a daunting task for a water utility that already exists and doesn't have the people in place in order to start getting it. So I think it's the other way around. I think we have a benefit in NEOM having a greenfield situation and being able to utilize the best that there is available today. The challenge is going to be how to remain in the forefront of innovation as we go forward.
Very interesting. And what an exciting time as well, of course. We move on now to our final question, in fact. This is for all of you, I'm hoping. While clients do state that they are encouraging sustainability, to what extent are they accepting that the initial direct cost is higher than their original budgeting and short-term return expectations? Who would like to have a go at that?
I'll have first go, because there's another opportunity to debunk a myth. So I challenge that we actually need to start from the premise that it costs us more. That's not ignoring the reality. If we want to change the way we work, if we want to deliver innovation, then that might need some upfront investment. But actually, there are some case studies that really clearly show reducing carbon reduces cost. And that's logical, isn't it? I mean, less carbon, less resource equals less cost. So, and if you look at the Infrastructure Carbon Review published by the UK government, that is subtitled "Lower Carbon, Lower Cost." So, I think we should start from. I mean, clearly you need a commitment, but we shouldn't start from a view that it's going to cost us more, because it'll drive innovation, it'll drive different ways of working, and in the end, it'll probably deliver broader business benefit.
Thanks so much. Who else would like to add to that last question there?
Laura, I'll have a comment. I think there's an element of starting anything new and innovation around sustainability that, if you think about the rate per square meter for the cost of photovoltaic cells, it's when it first started, if you wanted to invest in renewable energy, it was not competitive. But, you're now looking, for example, at cars. The cost of an electric vehicle versus the cost of an ICE engine vehicle is getting close to parity. It's not there yet, but it's getting close to parity. So it kind of depends a little bit where you are in the cycle. I think there is an element of it is worth clients looking at investing in innovation, absolutely, but I think that is separate from sustainability. So I think when you're looking at sustainable solutions, exactly as Dale has said, actually you can bring costs down. Because if you think about simple things, if you're reducing your carbon, part of that is your logistics. You're therefore not pulling materials in from as far away as you might otherwise do or previously have done. In other words, you're not always necessarily chasing the cheapest material, but you're still looking at the overall cost. So you look at alternatives that are closer and more available. And ultimately, I believe there is value in that. And I believe there is a better way of working, which is exactly what Dale was advocating.
Any further comments on that final question there on sustainability and cost?
Yes. Sorry, go ahead, Paul. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Gavin.
So this is an issue I face every single day here. Because we inherently have, let's say, put water pipes and buried them under the ground, and that's the best way to do it because then it's never seen any leaks and we have all those issues. And we can put business plans together that actually demonstrate that the whole path cost is better if you put it in a culvert and you can identify the leaks, repair them very quickly, no social impact, etc. So then you can put business plans together, but changing the minds of people is that actually do it in the field. If it's double the price, then people still want to know why is it double the price. If you put a business plan in front of them, they'll still say yes, but why would we do that today? So I think, and by the way, I haven't looked at all the details of COP26, but the biggest problem I have is the fact that we don't have a price on CO2. And I think the world fails, and I know there's it's $40, $80 a ton, etc. on CO2. Once there's a real value that's put in real tax, putting CO2 into the air, that actually hurts people's pockets, that's when we're going to start seeing a fundamental change in sustainability and people that develop sustainability. Until that point, until every country then adopts it, says, okay, if you're putting CO2 in the air, this is the price per ton that you need to pay on tax. Until that's adopted by every country, we're going to keep facing the same issues from a business plan perspective and justifying moving to sustainability. That's just my personal opinion.
Dr. Paul, your final comments?
I would agree with what's been said there by all of the panelists. I mean, really, I'll quote someone. Henry Ford said, if people had asked him back in 1914 or 1915 when he started up what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. That's not where we are. We want a car. We want something to drive the future. So there's a balance here that we have to strike between the whole life cost, which we've all discussed there, but also the return on investment. And that balancing those two is really, I think, key, along with all these sustainability drivers and all of these legislation and policies you can put in place to reinforce that this is definitely the way we need to be looking. We are growing bigger as a population globally, and we need to be conservative about what we do with our planet. So that's what I would focus on. Certainly the ROI, the ROI over the whole life cost.
Some great advice there. Sadly, we have run out of time. Dale, Dr. Paul, Gavin and Mark, it's been a great pleasure to hear from you. Thank you so much for such an insightful discussion. It's been brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, over to our audience now. We're going to be back for our final session of the day at 3:45 Gulf Standard Time, of course, with a discussion on embracing the next generation of architects. So we'll see you then at 3:45 Gulf Standard Time.